Okay. This episode of Merely a Setback is brought to you by the Ford Fusion. The Ford Fusion. What are you driving?
It's time to get your battle text scrolling and that trade chat trolling, and buckle up for the podcast about storytelling in the world of Warcraft. This is Merely a Setback.
Greetings, fellow lore walkers, and welcome to Merely a Setback, a podcast about storytelling in the world of Warcraft. My name is Sharku, and I'm coming to you live from my podcasting perch high in the mountains of North Carolina. I'm also a player on the Convert to Raid Battle.net News, the raid leader of Asparagus Initiative, and a member of the CTR community, and I am really bad at coming up with cold opens. And someone equally as bad as coming up with cold opens is joining us tonight from high in the mythical land of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It's Shoe Boots. Hey, Shoe.
Hey, sir.
I tried so hard to say it right, man.
Yeah,
the Ford Fusion. What are you driving?
Brought to you by the Ford Fusion. The Fusion. What are you driving?
I can't even.
It might be our worst one yet.
We tried. I was going to say it was brought to us by the Nightborn Magicians Academy, just giving another reason to ask an illusion, what are you hiding? They're illusions, Michael.
Yeah. For those of you that have no idea what's
trick,
going on,
it's an illusion.
We spent the last half an hour trying to come up with the opening joke, and that's what we got.
At least, yeah. We need to try to do that before 9 o'clock when we're supposed to be doing the show, but hey, whatever. We're professionals, right?
Yes.
Oh gosh. So you might have noticed we are not joined this week by Jared, who has real life and work and has to make money or something stupid like that, eating food. Food to eat, roof to rent, big dummy. But he'll be back hopefully very, very soon, and we will miss him very much this week.
I will miss him somewhat.
I'll miss him. He's going to, because we're not, like, I don't know how we're going to make a long enough show, because his we use as fillers while we're trying to figure out what the hell we're doing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it's not just, like, Jared has been instructed to slow us down so we can, like, and when we're just trying to figure, no, that's just kidding. I like picking on him. I did not mention last week that I like to pick on Jared a lot, but last week I got in trouble for not talking into the microphone through half the show, because half the time I'm back here and I'm just saying things and nobody can hear me, and I need to get right up in the microphone. It's a very sensitive mic, and I have to be, or it's a not a very sensitive mic. You have to be right here. It just picks up right here.
Yeah,
right here.
That's why I have this sort of Larry King kind of stance going here. I'm leaning in over this microphone. I normally don't look like this.
You got that.
I'm normally like this.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get suspenders for the next live show.
You've got a good mic, and it's picking you up really well. I've got a good mic too. It just is very delicate. It's got a sweet spot. I got to make sure I'm in the sweet spot and speaking loudly and enunciating. But we're gonna go ahead and jump into the show this week. We've got a good one for you. As usual, I want to remind everybody this is a spoiler show. We will spoil everything about World of Warcraft that we can get our hands on. As soon as it hits the PTR or the alpha, it is in our brain pieces and in our show notes and going to hit your ears. So just be aware of that. If you don't want the show spoiled, or if you don't want the game spoiled, you should
change your mind.
Change your mind. Yeah, I like. I'm always like, you should just listen to us later, or not listen to us at all. No, don't do that. Listen to us. It's fun. Change your mind. Spoil it. Spoil that garbage.
Yeah.
But there we go. Just want to make sure that you are aware of that. Any new listeners out there that don't like being spoiled. No, unfortunately, we don't have direct alpha access yet. I know at least one of my co-hosts on Convert to Raid, Gizmo, has alpha, and I've been hearing some stuff from him, and we're just kind of getting our information secondhand a little bit, but hopefully one of us will have alpha access soon. I know I'm on a list somewhere at Blizzard, and I think that they're being very selective with how they put this out. this time around. So don't want too many folks to have it yet, because if you've watched any Alpha XS, it's really not super polished. There's lots of buggies happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, the list.
As far as I know, I am not on any list. So if anybody with access to the list is listening to this, I would love to be on the list.
You'll get there. We'll get there as the show progresses. I'm sure we're gonna rile some feathers up there. We just got to get fans of the show. We actually, on CTR, what was it, last week? Taryn Gregory was in the chat room, and I was freaking out the whole time. Like trying not, because the only thing going on in my head was like, Taryn's in the chat room. Taryn's here. Taryn Gregory is listening to me podcast right now. And I had to actually try to do a podcast while that was happening for an hour and a half. It's pretty exciting.
And by the way, like for anyone that doesn't know Taryn Gregory's story, he is one of the coolest stories of all the Blizzard devs.
Yeah.
He made a machinima. He entered one of those contests like at BlizzCon. And they hired him to make machinima.
He won the contest, and that wasn't even like the award wasn't a job. It's just he ended up winning the contest, and they loved his work so much. They're like, "Do you want a job?" And now he's like the lead over all the cinematics in WoW.
Yeah.
So that's incredible. Yeah,
and he's
really
a lot taller than you might think.
I guess.
But you're really tall, so you wouldn't pick up on that.
I tower over all. Not true. I'm sure there are people taller than me. But there you go. So let's go ahead and get started. We got some tidbits in WoW. Tell us, Lore Walker, old Ian was hitting the Twitters this week. What was he saying, Shu?
This ain't
Or
Ian.
no, that's not that Lore Walker. It's a different.
This is
I was confused by
this is Sean Copeland.
Yes.
For anyone that's not familiar with Sean Copeland, he is one of the Blizzard lore masters. This guy.
I was thinking Watcher Dev, Lore Walker. Everything got confused in my head. My apologies. Right. I'm getting hit. The chat room is hitting me hard right now. I am such an idiot.
Yeah, Sean Copeland used to be very active on Twitter. He has basically my dream job, which is his job is to do what we're doing right now. He deals with the lore. He fact checks. He answers questions. He catalogs the story of WoW and other Blizzard properties. He's one of, I think, 3 people.
He's the anti-red shirt guy.
He's the anti-red shirt guy,
right?
Yeah, he has all the answers. So he kind of took I don't know the full story behind this. I don't know if he was told to or if he just got sick of it. But he took a hiatus from Twitter for quite some time, and only in the last week or two he sort of resurfaced. I was surprised to see him, happy to see him. But he's just posting that he's here's his tweet. Hey, super lore friends, heads up. We're working on an internal solution to automatically record your unanswered lore questions. Despite us lacking lore rulings for most of these, we're actively working to archive your question for future attention. More news when possible. So a lot of people used to and probably have resumed asking their lore questions to Sean Copeland because he answers them. If there is an answer, he gives them. But he doesn't get to make anything up, right? He can only answer what's known. So there is a system now that he is knowledgeable of. I don't know if he's developing it himself, but they're making a system where all of our lore questions will be able to record in a database for Blizzard to ideally address as they can.
So the story team will look into that, and as they're bringing, and maybe even giving them ideas for where the lore goes, like, we didn't think about that, and that is a loose end we need to tie up.
Yeah, and because there are some famous moments where, you know, when you're working on something with this many moving parts, you're going to mess up once in a while, and so there's a few famous moments where they have kind of contradicted themselves. And so asking some of these questions will help them find those moments. And who knows, you could be the next red shirt guy. You could become famous for stumping a dev.
That's the best. That's my dream. But I'm nowhere near that caliber. I'm but a young Padawan when it comes to lore. So I need to work that back up. But yeah, that does sound really interesting. I'm hoping that the coolest thing about that for me is the fact that we as fans may actually have some input into where the story goes by addressing these lore issues that aren't quite tied up all the way, all the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when we address that as fans and like, hey, we've realized this, what are you going to do about it? And then they go, oh, you'll see, right?
Yeah.
And then they figure it out. So it's something that would not have been addressed probably, or at least possibly, unless we as the fans brought it up. So we'll never really know. But at the same time, I would assume any time that question that we ask gets addressed, you should just go ahead and start putting on your resume that you were helped the story team for Blizzard on World of Warcraft. That you were an advisor for the story team.
And I will say that I love this because I love that this department, the lore master department, I love when they engage with the community. One of my most memorable moments from my first BlizzCon was, I think, 2014. They actually had, it wasn't really a panel per se. They just had a stage area where people could just ask questions, and they were just kind of there. And there was, like, I think one of them on stage at any given point to kind of lecture the group on questions, and then other ones were floating around. And I'm so sad I never caught her name, but a woman who worked in this department, I got to just kind of pick her brain on a bunch of questions that just, I remember one question I asked her. I didn't know the answer at the time because I hadn't read the book, but I know now. I asked her, like, why is Thrall's skin green if his parents never...
Right, if his parents never drank the blood.
Yeah, and that was... And now I know the answer to that, but at the time...
It bothered... Yeah, that always bothered me, too. Or just that idea, like, oh, green means you drank the blood. And, like, no, and they're like, oh, yeah, well...
Yeah, and just so that nobody's sitting there being like, well, what's the answer? Even the orcs that did not drink the blood, because they were so exposed to the fel, all of their skin eventually turned green, regardless of whether or not they had the demonic bloodlust.
Just being around the fel orcs, right, could cause your skin to be turned green. And this idea, well, and even in the movie, he was born green, right?
Yeah.
Which we may talk a little bit about the movie here in a second.
We might.
But yeah, so it's this idea that, like, maybe somehow just, you know, by breathing in the fel demonic presence of the blood or something, by being around it, it somehow affected him in utero and he was born that way. So it didn't affect his parents, but because they were exposed to it, it affected him.
Yeah, well, actually, I think
Alessander says that their food was tainted because their water was tainted. Just that idea of being in the presence of the fel causes it.
There's a passage, and I'm just, it's been years since I've read Rise of the Horde, so I'm sorry if I'm misquoting it, but I recall this passage where Orgrim and Durotan are sitting there, and they're, like, noticing that their skin is turning color. Like, they're just, like, their brown skin is, like, flaking off, and there's green underneath. Like, he's picking at his arm or something like that, and he's like, oh my God, I got green skin under here. Yeah.
I think that's a more interesting approach than you get it just by drinking the blood. Like, the fact that you didn't do anything, right? It's almost, I don't want to get political or anything, but just the concept of climate change, right? I'm not saying pro against, but the idea that even if you are working to be as carbon neutral as possible, if your society is contributing to something, it's going to directly affect you, right? So if, you know, same way thing with the blood, right? You're sitting here deciding that, you know, drinking fel blood is causing, you know, climate change, global warming or something. I don't know. But, you know, it's a bad idea. You choose not to do it, but your society around you does it. It still directly affects you. I think that's, I don't know. I don't know if they meant it necessarily to be like that, if that was something that they really wanted to decide to do, or if they were just trying to explain why Thrall was green. And cover it up. But it's brilliant because I think it really does it tells a new story that sometimes you don't have control and bad things happen to you, even though you did the right thing, right?
And you're touching on what I think is an important point that's often forgotten with World of Warcraft, is that a lot of the core pieces of this puzzle were created long before anyone ever thought that there would need to be complexity to it. So like that, like, you know, the idea of, like, well, why is Thrall's skin green? I think you're right. I think at some point they said, oh, geez, why is his skin green? We're going to have to come up with a reason for that. And I think that's where stories like this come from. And that's why I'm excited about this tweet by Sean Copeland, because more questions like that are going to surface, and it's going to challenge the writers to come up with a lore-based reason for things that don't seem to quite make sense.
Yeah, agreed. And that's, absolutely. Good, and it needs to happen. And I like how it seems like they're actually putting some effort into this with both hiring Chrissy, or not both, but all hiring Chrissy Golden, and having some system in place for these questions they can't answer. And even if you just notice over the last several years, lore has increasingly become more important to them. Right,
Yeah,
you look at the beginning of the game, and it was just sort of like they were only focusing short term on what's telling this story, right? Even in Warcraft 3, it was a great story in Warcraft 3, but there was no real connection to anything else. It's like, okay, we're telling a new story with new characters that roughly sort of relates to what we've been talking about before, right? Same thing in World of Warcraft, and then when I think they realized that, oh man, we're in this for the long, long haul. This isn't a 10-year game. This is a 20, 30, 50, 60-year game.
Yeah, right? or even, even beyond this game, this story will go on, whether that's in the form of Warcraft 4
right.
or novels or some other franchise. Like this story right now, World of Warcraft is the way this story is being told, but someday there will be a new main avenue this story is being told.
And as much as I love Metzen, he was part of the problem, though. I don't think he was very focused on what the story I'm telling now, and the loose ends didn't really quite make it all the way through. Near the end of his tenure, I think he really started realizing, oh man, all that stuff we came up with, and maybe it was Red Shirt Guy that really. And he's like, oh wow, people are really. You talk to him about that moment with Red Shirt Guy, and he says he's like, I didn't think I really ever realized how into the story people were. I thought it was more about the game. And at that moment, he knew that there was always this, he's a story guy. He wants to tell this story. He realized it was a story, but I think he realized at that point that the details are important and that we're picking up on it and we're eating this story up so much that we want it to be able to be smooth, right? Yeah. So I'm picking on Metzen a little bit. I mean, he's the brainchild that created this game. You know what I mean? The story all comes from Metzen. So I really can't see. He's the god of Azeroth. Yeah.
Yeah.
He literally created the entire world. And so,
I guess the thing about Metzen is that, his story I see as a great example of the power of collaboration in storytelling, because he told a story that is a phenomenal story for one person to tell. But to grow beyond that story is inhuman, and he needed a team behind him. And eventually he got to a point, at least I gather this from listening to his interview with Scott Johnson a year ago or so, that he got to a point where he had told as much of this story as he had in him to tell. And it was time for new people, not totally new people that had already been helping tell the story, but it was time for him to step away. And that's why, he's only been gone from the company for a short while, but it sounds like he was kind of pretty hands off with the Warcraft storyline for some time. He was really focusing on developing Overwatch for the last couple of years of his career with Blizzard.
He was shifting gears already while he was there. Yeah.
He was like overseeing stuff generally, but he wasn't the driving force behind it. So,
right.
And I think that's great, right? Because there's a lot of I think a lot of us kind of get the flavor of a Metzen story, right? Like we know those characters, we get it. And if you ever want to know more about Metzen, I actually read.
Good I've been trying to evil that used to be good.
Yeah. And everyone's voice sounds like Chris Metzen.
Right.
That's part of the story. But he wrote a book actually called Blood and Honor. And I never read this book before. It's an easy read. It's only like 60 pages. Like it's like a long short story, I guess you could say. But if you ever want to kind of know more about Chris Metzen as a storyteller, this is the quintessential story. It's essentially the story of what's his name? The guy who held the Ashbringer before Legion. He died in the Broken Shore. Why shoots?
It's not Uther. We know this. This is a lore podcast, by the way, guys. We know all of our lore.
Anyways, it's him, Tyrion Fordring. Thank you, Ellis.
God.
Jeez. Tyrion Fordring and Eitrig. It's during the time sort of before Warcraft 3, but after Warcraft 2, when things are peaceful, but there's still orcs out there, and they're bad. And Tyrion is like this paladin charged with guarding a village, and he encounters
Right.
an orc in the woods, and it's all about the honor. This idea of Tyrion being one of the first humans ever to sort of see honor in orcs. And anyways, it's worth reading if you want to learn more about Chris Metzen as a storyteller, because it's like basically an analogy for almost every major plot line he's written.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jonathan's in the chat room actually brings up a good point that I want to go ahead and shift to. It's not in our show notes, but we talked about it a little bit briefly, is that there has been some buzz in the news medias about the Warcraft movie and a possible sequel. Yeah. So, oh my God. Bop. Duncan Jones. That's the name. I was trying to remember Duncan's name. I'm an idiot. Yeah. Duncan Jones has been did an interview. Did a few interviews, and Wowhead. We actually what we have here is a Wowhead kind of overview of it. Some concept art from the movie, but they were asking him specifically about making a second movie, especially since it did so well in China, which is something that Jonathan's in the chat brought up. But
it did well internationally. It's just in America that it didn't do well.
Didn't well compared to other films that were, we're used to big films being, but yeah, internationally it did do really well. And honestly, and I know some more purist of lore fans may not appreciate the film. And that's okay. You can be in that camp. I'm in that camp with the majority of superhero movies, to be honest with you. But I really liked the Warcraft movie. Because for me, it was, I don't know, the stuff that wasn't necessarily quote unquote accurate didn't bother me as much. They kept the story in line. They kept what the theme was supposed to be about. They kept that pure. This theme is about, it had to do with good and evil, who's good and who's evil, and who are we to say, right? Mm-hmm. You have this true evil in Gul'dan. Right. And that was there. That's the real evil. But then you have perceived evil in both the humans and the orcs on the other side. And that's it. So that story was told, and I was cool with it. And I actually enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the journey of that story being told. And then even the perceived good in Medivh, and you realize he's actually, all of that. That idea was really, really cool. So I liked the film, and I really hope that they do another one, because I think that this story is worth telling. And I think that more people are going to get the story, because a lot of people don't play video games. I don't know if you know this. And a lot of people don't have the time to play video games like World of Warcraft, right? So I would love to see another movie. And it's possible, right, Shoeboots? Maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I was really hyper-focused on whether or not this movie was making money, and we still don't know the answer to that. By my estimate, it broke about even. I know that, you can't just compare budget versus box office, because there's the cost of advertising, and there's the fact that all these theaters take a portion of that revenue, right? Like what's a movie cost these days? $12, $14? I don't know. More than half of that, I think, is let's put it this way, less than half of that is going into the pocket of the people that made that movie. And then in China, this is the big problem for that movie, and what makes it really difficult to understand if it was profitable, is in China those numbers are even less. So being extremely profitable in China doesn't mean the same bottom line as being profitable in America, for example. Mm-hmm. So all that being said, breaking even has never stopped Hollywood before. You know what I mean? Like, they're breaking even in some ways. It is a reason to actually go ahead and make a second movie, because you now, for what turned out to cost you nothing in the end, you've put out an awareness of your franchise to the world.
Right.
And so, and you've also developed all the technology, right? Like, I'm sure they spent a lot of money developing the technology to make those orcs look so amazing, and those characters and the scene, all that stuff, that's done. So it costs significantly less to do a sequel. So I hope they do it, and I'm with you, Shark. I really enjoyed that movie. I was listening to Convert to Raid recently, and I think it was John. Oh my God, why am I so bad with names? Anyways, they were talking
Horseman?
about how Horseman, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know you, John Horseman.
John. Oh, I know him all too well.
I saw him at BlizzCon and I was going to say hi, but he had an entourage with him, and I was like, "Whoa, geez, okay." Just let him walk by me. Anyways, so he was saying that he understands why this movie is not good, but he liked it. And I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that it's not good, but I understand why people might not like it. Dislike it. And when I kind of separate myself from my bias to Warcraft, because I think that it's fair to say there was a lot of fan service in this movie, so I'm predisposed to liking this movie. If I take that part out of it and start to look at it more critically as just as a blockbuster movie, it did have a few problems. It had a few things that I would have changed, not necessarily from the story, but it needed more comedy, I thought. I didn't like some of the casting, but all that, whatever.
You know what it
right?
needed?
What?
It needed Sharku to play Muradin, which that's the story. That's the sequel. That's what we need to do next. We need to do that Warcraft 3 story.
Right.
And I'll come in playing Muradin. Or even if any dwarf. Come on. I'll play anything. Invent a new dwarf. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I've got
it. I will say this. It's probably the only, I was there opening night for the movie, and it's probably the only time that I've ever been able to shout as the lights go down for Gnomragon and get a big laugh out of the crowd for it.
I hate you so much. I'm so glad I didn't see that movie with you. I've been
best
so
gnome.
embarrassed.
Gnomragon!
But we did, yeah. I went and saw it opening night too, and I live in a little town. It wasn't the full theater, but there was quite a few people there. But I really liked the movie, and I thought it did good. And looking at numbers right here, I mean, they made money on the film. The budget was 160 million, and they made over 400 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's how much money they brought in. They didn't necessarily put 400 million in their pocket.
Yeah,
So,
I see what you're saying. Well, after the budget is 160 million, right? So the film budget, what the film costs to make, was 160. That includes salaries for the actors and all of the, everything. So they made, either way, they made millions in profit, but just not as many millions as they would have wanted to make. Not the billions or something that Star Wars is going to, as you say, they couldn't find the press costs, right? Either way, I think they made money. They made money.
they might have.
But they want to make more money. They don't want to waste their time on something that's not going to make them a significant amount of, it all kind of goes, how it sort of is. And apparently there were a lot of politics going on with the different
Legendary
sellings. Legendary was bought by Warner Brothers, and then they left Warner Brothers, joined Universal, there was a lot of shifting in the actual production companies that was happening at the time the film was made. And that is brought up because Sci-Fi in an interview asked Duncan Jones about his most difficult film shoot, and he said it was Warcraft because of all the political stuff that was going on. Not just that it was a hard movie to shoot, but it was just it was difficult for reasons which
I would imagine
are unfortunate.
He didn't say this specifically, but what I took from his interview was that there was probably a lot of pushing and pulling between the studio and Blizzard, of the studio wanting X and Blizzard saying, no, that's not our story. I think there was probably a lot of that going on. And I'm sure in the ways that they did change the story to some extent, those were probably compromises that made neither party happy, is my guess. And ironically, I did like the movie, but I actually think it might have been better served if they would have stuck with the original story. And I'm not sure if that's just because that's the story that I know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Maybe,
but that was sort of my takeaway.
The other thing is, how do you tell the story of Warcraft in 2 hours or less? You know what I mean? No, you don't. And that's why the movie ended up being what it is. It was a truncated, weird. They had to boil it down to a theme, and that it was that theme of good and evil. What's really good? What's really evil? Right? That was what the story they wanted to tell. The thing that I like most about some of this stuff that I'm looking on this site, as far as the quotes that was put out, Duncan Jones says that he and Chris Metzen both, quote, were really proud of Warcraft, and they think they both feel they made something that was ambition and true to what Warcraft was, and I would agree to that. I think that it's not necessarily the same as the original story, but it was Warcraft, and it was a good movie, and especially the CGI and the stuff that they did graphically with that film was ahead of its time.
I went with a buddy, and he used to play Warcraft. He kind of dropped out after Wrath, I guess, but we were friends before we played Warcraft and have been friends since. And he went to the movie with me, and I remember when we went out and talked about it, and he's like, oh my God, it felt like I was there. Like that was the Red Ridge Mountains.
Yeah.
Right. Like they really captured the atmosphere of these locations.
So yeah, you guys know Darius from Convert to Raid, right? Everyone's favorite jerk. He's actually not really a jerk. He just likes to be very opinionated on the internet. And he's one of my favorite people. I remember I was at BlizzCon the year that they announced the movie, or the year that they were showing trailers of the movie, right? In a special viewing room at BlizzCon, and the line was like 45-minute long. But I got in line with Darius, and I remember getting through that. It was me and him, and he'll deny it to this day. But, and he's kind of like hard edge and like nothing's gonna, that was cool. Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. It was interesting. He gives credit where credit's due. But I was sitting next to him, and they did the pan over in the trailer where it's just panning over Stormwind, and Darius very audibly goes, "Oh." That was the sound he made, and I was like, he just sees it, and he's like, "Yeah, this is cool, and then they do that. Oh, and that's how everybody felt. And I don't know if you've seen that. And like I said, this was 2 years before the movie even came out. We were just all really excited about it. But that particular scene, like it's real. Stormwind is real. It's not cartoony and computer graphics. It's real. It's a real place, and it felt real for a minute. And I thought they did. If you're gonna make a Warcraft movie, I think they made correct choices. I understand if you disagree, but I have a terminal degree in storytelling and theater and filmmaking.
Oh, really?
So yeah. So I'm right and you're wrong. Eat it.
I do think
true. That's not true.
I mean, one thing that I do think feels strongly that whatever we say about this movie, it does to me stand as a proof of concept. Like they made this movie look great and they made it work. And I hope that if that doesn't fuel the idea for a sequel, I was about to say exactly what is just being said in the chat.
HBO or Netflix or something.
Yeah, I think that a high budget seasonal show could be done. I think you could do a season to tell the story of the First War, and you could do a season to tell the story of the Second War.
Look at Netflix doing all this, like doing the live action or the new, like there's the new Full Metal Alchemist on Netflix. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I don't know if it's a film or if it's a new series or something. But they're doing these. They're taking on more risky projects because there's less of a risk when you're Netflix and have a bajillion dollars. And they're also the problem with that is I don't know how much of their Blizzard's not going to sell the rights to their story. And that's usually what happens with film companies. You sell them a script. You sell a production company your idea, and the production company takes it and rips it up, which is why I thought it was really interesting. First of all, you have to make sure that somebody, that either Ian or Chris Metzen or somebody, Christy Golden, or maybe all of them, are going to be co-producers on the film.
Yeah.
Because you have to have them involved in the actual filmmaking, because otherwise the production companies will do whatever they want with your story, and it could completely ruin it as far as that's something that I think is a problem in film today. Plays, you write in stage theater, you write a play, and that's law at that point. Once the play is published, you can't change anything. You have to ask specific written permission from a playwright to even, curb an expletive or something like that if you're doing it for a middle school crowd or something like that. And like, well, we can't say shit in middle school, so can I change that word? You have to get specific, explicit written permission from the playwright or whoever owns the script if the playwright isn't alive, as long as it's not in public domain. But anyway, blah, 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 blah. It's not that way for film. and they can completely. So that's why I think that they were very selective with who they went with Legendary. They were very selective of who they chose to direct the show, and they trusted Duncan, being a fan of the franchise, and also giving them their word that he wasn't going to change anything without approval.
Yeah,
that's rare. That's rare in filmmaking.
I would love to see it, though. I'd love to see a Netflix style show. Make two showrunners. Give one of the showrunning jobs to a well-known, established, kick-ass showrunner. Like Game of Thrones level, that sort of thing. Somebody who we know is going to do well with this, and make the other showrunner like an adamant defender of this story. Like I've
already said Overwatch needs to be a Saturday morning cartoon.
That would be great.
Like, come on, right? Or even like a Heroes of the Storm to type all of the Blizzard heroes together doing something like Heroes Avengers, or I don't know, Blizzard Avengers. No, but that idea, it could be, but at the same time, I also want to see video games ushered in as this true, honest, legit storytelling device, which is what this show is even about. You know what I mean? And that's something that I'm doing work on at my university. I want us to be able to see something like World of Warcraft or the Mass Effect series, or these really story-based. This is a storytelling device. It's not just about wasting time, while we're listening to our rap musics, us young kids. That's not what video games are about. It's about we're receiving information. We're receiving a story. We're learning while we're playing these games. We're learning about choices. We're learning about, look at World of Warcraft. It's all political. And it's all stuff that we're dealing with today. Like just the fact that I could relate climate change to skin turning green a little bit. Or these are things that we are experiencing today. And so even though I think that different mediums would be great for telling this story, and maybe we should venture into it here and there. Like I think the movies are good. I think having novels and comic books out are really good as sort of supplemental. But the real story, what's really going on, I think we should trust the video game to tell it, because these games that are coming out now that the lore and the story is so important. This is what's really going to thrust gaming into that next, where it's going to be something that's like not just making video games, but it's going to be like having a literature degree. You're going to be studying gaming literature at some point in time. It's going to happen. I'm hoping to pioneer that field myself so I can have a job forever. But and I'm sure there are other people already working on it. But this idea of gaming as literature is a really, really interesting concept, because it's what it is. It's storytelling. I don't know. I just went off on a tangent, and we've got to move on. But yeah, let's make another movie. I'm down 100%. Let's do it. I'd go see it. You've got 1 ticket sold already. 2 at least. Shoe boots.
Yeah, I'll probably pick one up. But I have a free pass, so I don't know if they get money for that.
I think you do. I think they get. I mean, because you're paying for the pass, so that it's that idea of, it's sort of like ratings on TV. Like you're paying a lump sum to watch TV, but the shows you watch are getting money based on what you choose to watch.
I'm sure the pass will be expired by the time this movie comes out.
We'll figure it out. Just get another pass. So we've got some more really quick news before we jump into our deep dive today, guys. We've got more broadcast text that apparently came out shortly after we recorded our last show, because it's a little bit dated according to what Shoeboot said, but we wanted to go ahead and talk about it and sort of glean over it. There's a whole lot of text here, but not a whole lot of interesting stuff that I could see. Shu, what did you see?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that I don't want to call it filler text, but there's a lot of stuff here that I think is relatively inconsequential. But it is interesting to see the flavor. It is interesting to see that we've got some text from Greymane at the Battle of Lordaeron, which I'm sure is going to add fuel to the theory that he started everything and that he's terrible. One thing that I found,
obviously we saw Greymane at the Battle of Lordaeron already.
Yeah.
Right.
But I just feel like the more visible that he is, Alessandra, we're not going to be done being spoilery ever. I'm sorry. the more we see Greymane, the more people are going to speculate, I think. And I don't know what the ultimate plan is with that character, but I love the idea of Blizzard teasing it if people are going to think it. I guess the other two things that I kind of glean from here is there's quite a bit of text about in Borealis Harbor. For those of you that don't know, Borealis is going to be the Alliance hub in Battle for Azeroth. It's sort of a port city, the capital of Kultiris, and it's on the latest build of the alpha, and it looks phenomenal, even in its half-finished state. I can't wait to walk around there. But there's some discussion of the politics. Where does it say the Ashbane Trading Company holds all the state contracts for trade and production, and the Proudmoores are the military. So Kultiris is made up of many houses, this is a quote, but the real power is split between Proudmoore and Ashbane. Now we know who the Proudmoores are. We're going to learn a lot more about Ashbane as we go on, I'm sure. So I got to play the initial quest line at BlizzCon, and I was really intrigued by the story. I don't have much to say about the Horde side other than it looked cool. The Kultiris side, as I see it and what I've seen on the alpha, it looks like a really sort of cool mix of sort of like kind of a political intrigue story mixed with witch hunts mixed with pirates. I'm really excited about this story. It's on one hand, it's a direction they've never went before. On the other hand, it feels very Warcrafty. So that's really cool to me. And I guess the final thing that I would talk about here is that there's some stuff about Azerite. And this is on my mind because we didn't even mention this in the opening, but the new Battleground. We're fighting for Azerite. And
that's true.
And at the time of this recording, we're recording on March 5th. That Battleground officially goes live tomorrow, March 6th, which I believe is also the end of the countdown for the casters on the Broken Shore.
It was very fun. It was very fun playing for it. And by the way, if you're going to play that PvP stuff, guys, please don't just fight around. So anytime somebody's capping something, all right, listen. Anytime there's something you have to click on and there's a timer that you have to channel a cap, right? Capturing that point, you just have to, like, you can walk up and white damage that person, right? You have to interrupt the cap. You can't just fight around them and be like, oh, we're fighting and killing Horde or Alliance. We're winning the other. No, because they're going to take the point and they're going to take all the Azerite, and you're going to lose forever and ever. All you're going to do is lose. And I'm a healer. I don't have any AoE. Like, some of you get seriously, just pop Blizzard or Hellfire just around the point so no one can cap it until you're done with the fight, guys. It's not that hard.
To give
it's
some
not
context.
that hard.
So just to give context to this rant, a few of us played a lot of PvP in the last week for whatever reason. And it was funny how quick we became experts and just started just talking trash about our team.
Here's another thing. Don't quit the game because you lost one cap.
Yeah.
The games last 10 to 15 minutes. There's a timer. Don't quit it. Don't quit at 2 minutes because, somebody killed you and everybody's so bad. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I hate that. And I hate
you. You know who the I'll tell you the worst player in WoW Battlegrounds is. It's the guy that when you start Warsong Gulch or whatever, and the other side gets one flag, and there's like 12 minutes left, but they got a flag, and then the guy just types GG, and it's over. Like that, I hate that guy because that's the guy that types GG, and then all of a sudden, like, 2 people drop out of the group because they see that and they're like, "Oh wow,
well, I guess we're done." Yeah, I don't care. I'm not going to queue up for anything else anymore. I don't even care. This is sure loss.
Yeah,
that's the thing. You also get a 30-minute timer when you leave a battleground, so it's so much easier just to AFK in the game if you're going to do something. Like, wait for the timer to be. Oh God, you're all terrible.
Join us for Battleground.
Get out of my country. Anyway, there we go. So yeah, I don't know. We're talking about PvP and all this. Yeah, lots of text. Check it out. Broadcast text. Lots of stuff about Azerite here. I thought it was pretty cool. Rexar shows up. We're seeing Rexar. We definitely have confirmed Magar orcs for realsies because we have their first. It looks like a flirt. You must be a frost wolf because you've made tracks to my heart.
Oh.
Hey. It's a good one. Also, like, technically what I really want to do right now, especially because Alessander is like, wave your hands when you're done talking about spoilers. I want to start waving our hands and then wait a second and then talk about how Jaina dies or something. Like, just screw with them. We're not going to do that, though. We're not going to do that. We should, but I can't promise it would go over well.
Okay.
But we are going to move on, and that's it for the news. That's it for the news.
That's it for the news.
There's the news sounder there, just singing. That's it for the news. All right. Let's talk about. Finally, I'm so tired of Jaina. Good. I'm glad you heard my joke, Alessander. I was hoping that wasn't for naught. Let's talk about war chiefs. Let's talk about some more war chiefs. How's that
Chief it
sound?
up.
Shoe boots. So last week we started our series on talking about war chiefs of the Horde. And we're going to continue that this week. We left off with the mantle of war chief was being held by Orgrim Doomhammer.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the Second War.
Yes, and he was arrested by Turallion, taken into custody.
Arrested by Turallion. Go ahead and pick us up there and tell us a little bit about the end of Orgrim's, because he was arrested by Turallion.
Well, there's some debate as to when his reign as war chief ends, because he was arrested and the Blackhand clan decided that was it for him, and they declared, I believe, Rend Blackhand war chief, who retreated into Blackrock Mountain and continued the old Horde, a splinter group of the Horde. We also talked last week about how, meanwhile, back on Draenor, Ner'zhul had assumed the mantle of war chief, and that did not end well for him. But I think most people would probably agree that Orgrim did not lose the title of war chief simply for being captured. He continued to be the war chief for years to come, even though he was in captivity for some time. After the Second War was sort of a time of prosperity for the Alliance. At the time, I guess the humans, the dwarves, the high elves were the main three members. And you have to remember that at this time, we're only talking about the Eastern Kingdoms. So continents like Northrend and Kalimdor, they're somewhat known of. They're talked about. I'm sure there might be minor obscure settlements in these places.
But there's nothing really going on. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not really considered. I would liken it to probably the way that the Americas were to Europe prior to the big colonial expansion.
Yeah. Or
people
even China.
Yeah. Like, people were vaguely aware that something out there existed. There were stories like, the Viking, but nobody really knew much of it, and there was no maps or anything like that. So this is really just a story of the Eastern Kingdoms, and which at the time was just referred to as Azeroth. They just called what is now the Eastern Kingdoms was just known as Azeroth, because that was the whole world as they knew it. Anyways, so Orgrim is put in an internment camp, as many of the orcs are. All the orcs that are captured are put in internment camps, and a sort of lethargy takes over. The bloodlust from the demon's blood sort of dissipates over the years, and they become kind of slow, quiet, sedated, docile. Yeah, and it just becomes a way of life that if you're an orc, you're in a camp. Now there are some orcs that do evade capture. Most famously at this point would be Grom Hellscream, who is the war chief of, I think, the Warsong clan. I think, anyways, we all know Grom as he was in Warlords of Draenor. We're not talking about that Grom. We're talking about the original timeline Grom Hellscream, who was the first orc to drink the demon blood, and he remained at large during this time. And it's during this time that Orgrim manages to escape at one point, and he doesn't go to lead the Horde again. He just goes off by himself and lives as a hermit. He keeps in touch with a network of orcs that are escaped but in hiding across the Eastern Kingdoms, but he just keeps to himself. And it's around this time that Thrall, we pick up on the story of Thrall. And Thrall, we mentioned last time the Moses story, put in the water and sent away. Mm-hmm. I did some research, and that's actually not what happened in the original storyline. That's something that we have sort of supplanted in our minds. Yeah, the movie does it, but I feel like that's what I thought happened before I saw that movie. So I think that might be just like a fan assumption or something. But Thrall was actually found among the bodies of his assassinated parents by a human named Aedelus Blackmore. And Aedelus Blackmore was sort of the regent, I guess you could say. He was in charge of a place called Stromgard Keep, which is sort of an abandoned place you can go to in game in the Hillsbrad foothills.
Yeah.
And so he brought Thrall back and gave him the name Thrall. So Thrall's name is given to him by a human, and it means slave. He was named slave, and he was raised to be a gladiator. He was raised to fight and make money, essentially, for Blackmore. And as he got older, Blackmore realized that he possessed the raw strength of an orc, but what would make him the ultimate gladiator is if he had the intellect of a human. And so he had Thrall taught in human ways. He learned how to read, he learned histories, he learned all the things that a proper human of the day would want to know. And most of this was done by a woman named Taratha Foxton, and she became the person that sort of helped Thrall take care of his wounds from being a gladiator, but also taught him to read, taught him to speak the common human language. Sorry, I need water.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is her mother was actually his wet nurse. That's something I'm looking up right now. Yeah, a human woman. Taretha's mother was his wet nurse, nursing him as he was getting old, and then he became friends with the daughter, who showed him kindness. And you have to understand, Thrall was treated terribly during this time. He was tortured for refusing to finish off other orcs in battle. And Taratha was really the only person in his life that treated him kindly. So they eventually began writing letters to each other secretly to talk. And finally, she helped him escape one day. He escaped from the keep and just, ditched off into the woods. And it was during this time he goes through, there's not a lot written about this time, but there is some written about this time. He eventually connects with the Frostwolf clan. He finds his old clan. And an old shaman, Drekthar, of the Frostwolf clan, who you will know well if you've played through Frostridge in Warlords of Draenor. He recognizes who he is, that he's the son of Durotan. And he communicates this information throughout this interesting network of hidden orcs throughout the Eastern Kingdoms. And so word gets to Grom, who's sort of a freedom fighter at this point, trying to break orcs out of these internment camps and reclaim their former glory. And word actually gets to Orgrim Doomhammer, the hermit, who decides he wants to meet the son of his best friend. And so Orgrim meets with him, but withholds his true identity. He meets him as just sort of an old hermit. And it's sort of like when Luke meets Yoda, right? Like Yoda withholds who he really is, and basically just tries to annoy him, tries to anger him
just tries to test him, see who he is. And he insults Thrall's honor, he insults his family, and eventually Thrall has had enough and wants to defend his honor. And they go to battle, and Thrall wins. He defeats Orgrim. But he refuses to finish Orgrim off. And that's when Orgrim tells him who he is. And then he's like, "What? Oh, I'm so sorry. You're the war chief."
Yeah.
Ah! It's like you give the finger to someone in traffic and then find out it's your new boss when you get to work, basically. So he becomes Orgrim's sort of redemption. They join with Grom and they start fighting to free orcs. And it's only after a series of break-ins, they break into an internment camp, and the Alliance is expecting them, and they ambush them from behind. And Orgrim is killed in battle. It's actually in Arathi Highlands, what is the internment camp that is now known as Hammerfall. Is called Hammerfall because it's where Orgrim Doomhammer fell. Right. It's where he died, and with his last breath, he named Thrall War Chief, and that's when Thrall becomes the War Chief of the Horde, along with Gromsh Hellscream as sort of his right-hand man. And he takes the armor of Orgrim, and he takes the Doomhammer, and he has a Frostwolf icon, logo, whatever you want to call it, crest, put onto the Doomhammer. And this is the beginning of Thrall's reign as the next war chief, and it's also the beginning of the new Horde, in my opinion. You know, last week we talked about the old Horde that was driven by the demonic invasion. This is a new Horde full of agency and self-determination.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know how much further we want to go. Do we want to talk about this, or?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, just the idea, because what's interesting, I think, about Thrall is for the first time we see a war chief that, first of all, he was very poorly treated by the humans, right? But
yeah.
We also have, for the first time, a war chief being treated with any kindness whatsoever from any other race, right? We don't hear those stories. It was all like, we're orcs and they're not, and we're, defending our whatever, either because of the bloodlust or because we're defending our lands or because of whatever, we're at war, right? And this is, and I see, I don't know, maybe I'm going a little bit too far here, but any fans of Star Trek, right, out there, orcs kind of, they strike me like Klingons, right? Instead, they're a warrior race, right? They're not evil, but they're seen as evil in a lot of ways, evil, dangerous, but they're a warrior race. They have a different necessary way of, it's blood and honor, right? It's this idea of the strongest, right? The idea, Mak'gara, right? You become the new leader by killing the old leader. That's a Klingon thing too. You know what I mean? I'm wondering if that's not a lot of the inspiration in the idea of the orcs as far as the Warcraft universe is concerned. Because they're almost interchangeable in the way that they kind of deal with stuff. But Thrall wasn't raised as an orc, sort of like Worf from the Next Generation.
Right, which was on TV at about the time that these stories were being developed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he ended up becoming the leader of the orcs, right? And because of that, because of his interaction and the kindness that he was shown by his, I don't know, not necessarily adoptive family, but by Taretha and her, while her mother was just kind of ordered to keep him alive. But at the same time, it was this, he realized that humans weren't the enemy, that the particular human that enslaved him, right? And the ones that tortured him, those were the enemy, but not all humans. So he has this kind of, it's a very interesting shift. It's why this is the new age of the Horde, right? Because even when he's meeting with the Frostwolf clan and they're talking about the old ways, they're talking about the way old ways.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Before the demonic presence, right? And they're trying to bring it back to that, but at the same time, Thrall wants to take the old ways and thrust them into the future as well. And now we're in a place where we have to interrelate with different races, right? They screwed it up with the Draenei. They did not relate with them very well. And now we're in this new place where there's all these vast races of intelligent life all over the place that they don't even realize that are there. But there's dwarves and humans and elves, and through his journeys, Thrall finds a bunch of new ones. But I think that's the most important or interesting thing about Thrall. What makes him is this understanding of not being alone, right?
Yeah.
They're not alone as the Horde, and this idea, and he was always really defensive or supportive of the idea that there's no, the Horde is about coming together, and there's no, the evil that we're fighting or the enemy that we're fighting is this idea, almost this idea of intolerance. You know what I mean? People that can't tolerate us as a race, or we'll destroy them. That's the orcish way. You know, they need to get out of the way, or we will destroy them. But those that were not offensive to them, leave them be. Let's make peace. Let's make peace with those who will make peace and destroy those that will cause war. That was always kind of, I think, sort of, and that was a new thing, because before that it was all about conquering and being the sole conqueror, and no one but who's, if you're not in the Horde, you're against the Horde.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot on this show about how, like, in the story of Warcraft, there isn't a good guy, bad guy between the Horde and the Alliance, and that's because of this moment. Prior to this moment, in my opinion at least, there is a good guy, bad guy, right? Like, prior to the Third War, the Horde is the bad guys and the Alliance is the good guys. And that's partially because,
even though there are some good guys inside the Horde trying to make it not, it's still, that makes sense.
Yeah. And part of that comes from the fact that, the first version of the Horde was written for like a couple kind of hokey games that were just kind of a loose spoof of Lord of the Rings, right? Like, there was just no intention behind Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2 to make a comprehensive story spanning countless millennia. Like, it's just not there. And this is a good example we were talking about earlier of filling in those gaps, right? Like who is Orgrim Doomhammer? Who is Duratan? We can add these stories later to show that the Horde wasn't as bad as we thought they were. And that can become the seed to tell the story of a character like Thrall.
Right.
And Thrall's a character that I can get on board with. I've spoken a few times about my bias towards the Alliance, but I love the Horde under Thrall. And I love what he stood for in this time. There's a few amazing things about Thrall at this time as well. He did not know how to speak the Orcish language until he escaped. He was only ever taught human. He had to learn, and he learned from Gromish. He also had no knowledge of an Orcish idea of honor, and it was just sort of innate within him, right? It's just sort of a quality that he had that orcs like Grom took notice of.
Right.
He also had no knowledge of shamanism. That's something that he learned after he met back with the Frostwolves. And that's when he started to kind of learn about the shamanistic ways. So even though he's the greatest shaman in all of Warcraft, he didn't grow up being one. He was raised to be a warrior. And that's why he wore metal armor all the way up until around the time of Cataclysm, when he decided to really focus on his shamanism. Finally, we should mention, though, so there's a couple incidents. First of all, we should probably talk about what happens to poor Tareth of Foxton. When he becomes the war chief, his first act as war chief is to go back and free Taratha. And he marches on the walls of Stromgarde Keep, if I remember correctly, and demands to his former slave master, Aedelas Blackmore, to turn her to Durnhold. Yeah, sorry, not Stromgarde. To Durnhold. And he says, turn her loose, and we'll leave you alone. And in response, her severed head is lobbed over the wall at him. She's discovered as a traitor for letting him out, and she pays the ultimate price.
Right.
And I think that's an important thing, not because it's gruesome and jarring, but because it's a moment that tests Thrall and his belief in what human beings can be. he sees this terribleness, and it's not long after this where, again, that story, Blood and Honor, Tyrion Fordring. If you've only played WoW, you think of him as this great paladin, but if you played vanilla, Tyrion Fordring is sort of a washed-up has-been that you find out in the Eastern Plaguelands. It's not till Wrath of the Lich King that he sort of redeems himself. And the reason that he's a washed-up has-been in the Eastern Plaguelands is because he's disgraced. He was kicked out of the Paladin Order. The light was taken away from him. He was to be hung. He was to be killed. He can't really be hung or his head chopped off. He was to be executed. Mm-hmm. And the reason that he's not executed is because Thrall saved him. Not on purpose. Thrall was there to save Eitrigg. But during one of Thrall's many invasions to rescue orcs, he ran into Tyrion, and he ensured that Tyrion had a safe escape. And he did this because he knew that Tyrion had stood up for Eitrigg, that Tyrion had been an honorable man. And so Thrall's showing that whether you're human, orc, or otherwise, he's not really interested. He's interested in whether or not you're an honorable person. And that really sort of informs the later decision that he makes to start letting other races into the new horde. There's a lot of just really cool kind of like pieces in this part of the story that sort of informs what the horde becomes later on in World of Warcraft.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to keep moving on and sort of talking more about the story of Thrall. So throughout he's doing all this stuff. He's getting started as war chief, and this is where we begin Warcraft 3 when we do the Warcraft 3 campaign. We have Medivh visiting Thrall as Raven form Medivh, right? Resurrected Medivh, the prophet.
And by the way, with Warcraft 3 recently updated to work on all your computers, this is kind of the starting point of where you want to be if you want to play that game. If you've never played it.
It really is. And it's a great, I still haven't finished the Orc campaign, actually. I need to do that. And there goes my monitor. But he's given this call to flee or to go to Kalimdor, this continent that no one's ever heard of, right? Across the Great Sea. Mm-hmm. He's like, okay, I guess I'll go. And on the way, he begins to meet these different groups. The first group I think he encounters is the trolls. Yeah.
He encounters the Darkspear trolls, which are led at the time by Vol'jin's father,
Sinjin.
Yeah. And he this is an interesting part of the story because I don't think it's ever been fully fleshed out. They're in, we don't know exactly where this is, I don't think.
There was a fierce storm. There's a storm around the Maelstrom, right, as he's trying to cross the sea, and they get shipwrecked on an island out there.
Somewhere.
And that's kind of where, that's sort of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Interestingly, I think they encounter these trolls, and these trolls they're dealing with a couple problems. One is that these sea witches are after them, which they never really define them beyond sea witches, but I've always assumed that they were Naga.
Yeah, me too.
And they're also facing war with, I think, Kultiran settlers on their island. Like Kultiran humans are trying to eradicate them to take the island for themselves, which is also interesting. Maybe we'll get more information on this in the next expansion if it occurs to them. Yeah.
I'm wondering. Well, and a lot of people refer to this area as Darkspear Island, right? Which isn't really a thing, but this is the island where the Darkspear come from.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I remember when they I was wondering if maybe the Echo Isles are sort of that, like, even though it's kind of weird because they're just like right off the coast.
Right off the coast. There's no way. Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah. So at any rate, the Horde essentially help. I mean, the short and sweet of it is that Thrall decides to help these new friends deal with their problems. They take out the Naga, and I'm hazy on this, but Sinjin dies. I think he dies in battle. I can't remember if it's with the Naga or the humans.
Or later, yeah.
but he dies.
At some point, he does.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, it's at that point with
and
the Murlocs.
yeah, and so this Vol'jin becomes the new leader of the Darkspear, and they go on their way. Vol'jin does not join them at this point. I believe some of the trolls do, and that's why you get like troll
Trolls for your
units in the game. Yeah, but Vol'jin decides to stay back and oversee. They decide that they don't want to stay on the island because they're just going to die out if they stay there. So Vol'jin rejoins them later. He stays back at this point to help affect the escape or the resettlement of his people. So Thrall moves on and lands in. I don't know if it's known exactly where they land in Kalimdor, but they land in Kalimdor somewhere, and they very quickly run into a few groups. They run into the Tauren, a Tauren nomadic people that are walking, and they're fighting against, what are those four-legged guys called? They're in Desolace. The Centaurs. They're in sort of a battle with the Centaurs, and so Thrall befriends Cairn Bloodhoof, the leader of the Tauren, and I'm not sure how much of the exact story of Warcraft 3 we want to go through here, but
yeah, we don't have to go through the entire lore, but the idea is that we've got Thrall going through and meeting all these groups, and this idea of the Horde, and what the Horde has been up until this point has been orcs banding together, different tribes of orcs, and Thrall expands this and goes, you know what? No, not just orcs. These guys need a place too. So trolls, you're coming with us. You're part of the Horde now. We're all doing this together, right? And this is sort of begun, like, as Sinjin's dying, he gives this vision to Thrall that says, you are going to lead the Darkspear tribe to greatness. And so Thrall takes this mantle on quite literally. He's like, well, even though Vol'jin is the new leader of the Darkspear trolls, I'm the leader of all of it. I'm going to be their leader. If that's what they need, I'm going to help Vol'jin lead. We're going to lead together. They can follow me. Let's all go. The Horde is the Horde. So now we're not just the Orcish Horde. We're the Orcish and Troll Horde. He meets Cairn Bloodhoof, who needs some friends, right? He needs assistance against the Quillbore and the Centaurs and the Harpies and all the stuff on Kalimdor. And Thrall knows that he's been sent to Kalimdor to make this a home for his people. Well, he's going to have to keep the natives happy. He needs some allies. Why not the Tauren? Let's add the Tauren to the Horde. Why not Tauren, right? And so he gets rid of that idea that the Horde are orcs, and no longer, and that's why we're able to play different races. That's why we're able to be Nightborn, basically night elves in the Horde, right? Nowadays, elves have joined the Horde. The fact that elves joined the Horde back in BC was a big deal, right? Everybody thought, well, obviously the new races that are going to happen, Alliance is going to get blood elves or high elves, what they thought were what they were calling high elves, right? Oh, we're going to have high elves because we were all high elves before. And then, nope, they gave the elves to the Horde, and that was crazy time, right? Anyway, people were like, what the heck? How are we doing? You can't have the high elves join the Horde. They fought against the Horde. They're enemies, mortal enemies. Not according to Lorthamar, who forgave.
Right.
Forgotten forgave. But anyway, the Horde is this new idea, and that's what I see the Horde of today. The Horde is, if you will join us, we're stronger together, right? That idea. The good Democratic slogan, stronger together, right?
Stronger together.
But that's what they are. Here we go. Trolls, if you're willing to back the war chief, you're in. If you're willing to back the war chief, you're in. And we do this together, and we're under one leadership, one unified leadership. And even the Council of the Horde is interesting. When you look at the Alliance, it's all Varian or all Anduin. They're the undisputed leader with some advisors, right? But the Horde, you go to that when you're talking about Azerite, the new scenario that we've got in the game now, where we're discovering Azerite. It's all the Horde leaders sitting around a table. It's almost like a council, where Sylvanas is the undisputed war chief, but it's a council. They're doing this together. I don't think she would necessarily completely, you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
seems a lot more Democratic, or at least Republican,
And
than
there's like a really interesting aspect to it in that there's also distrust, right? Like
right,
old habits die hard, and I think that's a really I think it's a very realistic thing to do in a situation like that. Yes, the Tauren and the orcs have so much in common, but and you see that echoed in that scene you're talking about. But there's distrust there, right? They're not all unconditionally on that team. Their past haunts them, right? That's one thing that also makes the Horde very interesting to me from a storytelling perspective. They have a dark history. Where they come from is an evil place, and it continues to inform their identity today. And how much of that do they want to embrace, and how much of that do they want to set aside? And it seems to ebb and flow, right? When Thrall was their war chief, they wanted less of that. But towards the end of Thrall's reign, there was a lot of rumblings within the Horde that maybe he wasn't the right war chief for them anymore. That he was maybe a little too soft on the Alliance, and maybe was forgetting about the warrior culture that he came from.
yeah,
And so then it was time for Garrosh. So the interesting thing about the constant changing of war chiefs, I've heard people complain about it before, but I've always thought it was actually a cool thing that made the Horde unique from the Alliance. Is that the Horde will ebb and flow with new war chiefs from time to time, because they're not necessarily concluded in who they are and what they want.
And what's interesting about that too is there's this idea. First of all, I have to admit I've been obsessing over the Hamilton musical again because Weird Al put out a polka, and I've been listening to it. But I was just thinking about this concept of George Washington stepping down as president. Right? This was not a concept that was the fact that you have power. George Washington could have easily been the president until the day he died. Easily.
Yeah.
He would have been elected unanimously over and over and over again. That's the
I
kind of
believe
power that he
advised
had.
to.
Yeah, when he tells people I'm not running for president after my second term, I'm stepping down. That was revolutionary to people. Why would you not do that? You could be. Why are you? And it was this idea because we need to. It's not about who holds the powers. It's about taking turns and doing this democratically, right? 8 years is long enough. If you can be the leader for 8 years, and then you figure it out, and then you let somebody else have a shot, whether you agree with them or not. Because Thomas Jefferson, who ended up as the third president after John Adams, did not agree. There was a lot of different. So, but it's this idea. Anyway. American history aside, that's something that Thrall decides to do eventually. He doesn't die. He doesn't get Matgarad. Like the rest of the war chiefs all died and then handed the mantle down to somebody else.
Yeah.
Thrall just stops. Just says, I'm done. Something else has come up, and I'm done being war chief. Originally, it was to go and, save Azeroth from Deathwing, right? To become the new aspect of Earth. But even when that was over, we're like, okay, Thrall's back. Thanks, Garrosh.
Yeah, he didn't come back after. He was
Garrosh.
Done.
Yeah, thanks, Garrosh. Thanks for holding my seat warm as the interim war chief, which, at least me as a Horde player back then was what I hated Garrosh. I hated Garrosh. He was a terrible war chief because I was so used to Thrall. I was a Thrall baby, right? My Horde was all nice and happy and fluffy, and we love everybody. But Garrosh came in, and it was a lot of that old. So anyway, the moral of the story is Thrall steps down and says, I'm no longer going to lead the Horde. But you know who can? The son of the man that our Capitol building is named after, Grommash Hold, right? Grommash Hellscream's son, Garrosh, who we found in Outland. He's going to lead the Horde now.
Yeah,
he's the one. He refused to drink the blood.
Well, he never got to.
He never got to?
He was sick.
That's right. But then he realized that he made the right call and kept everybody away, right? Wasn't that a thing? I don't remember. Maybe I'm crazy.
So the story goes that he's ashamed of his father because he knows his father drank the blood twice. Towards the end of the Third War, Grommash became a liability for the Horde. He drank the blood again when Manoroth returned. And he ultimately redeemed himself, but that's not the part that Garrosh was raised to know. He was raised to know that his father was the fall of orcs, right? His father was the first one to drink the blood, and his father drank the blood again. And it's during the Burning Crusade when Thrall visits Nagrand. He goes to Outland to learn more about his people, and he finds Garrosh. And tells Garrosh the story of how his father died a hero.
Right.
And he brings Garrosh back with him to he puts him on his council and says, I'm going to raise this kid right.
Need your help. And during the Wrath of the Lich King, Garrosh is essential in strategies that are made.
Yeah.
On not just the Alliance, but the ongoing war with the Alliance, but also on the assault on the Frozen Throne.
Yeah. And he's, you'll first see him in Borean Tundra. If you play the Horde campaign in Borean Tundra, he's in charge of the Orc campaign there. He's also, you'll see him, and I'm sure many people who listen to this have seen these, but you can go and watch all the old kind of in-game machinima trailers that they make for every patch. They always make a trailer for whenever a new raid tier is coming out. And so back during Wrath of the Lich King, they made one for Secrets of Ulduar. And you can see a young, untested, moody, bad attitude Garrosh in tow as Thrall's trying to talk. Thrall's trying to talk diplomacy, and Garrosh is ruining it because he wants to fight Varian. You can also see, to this day, if you just go up to Northrend and land your character by the Colosseum there, where the Crusade is, the Crusaders Colosseum, periodically major lore characters will show up and talk to Tyrion, and he'll talk to them. And you can go there and you can watch Garrosh and Thrall show up and talk. And if you actually go in, and you can single player these if you have a 110, you can go into the Crusaders Colosseum, the raid encounter.
Trial of the Crusader.
Trial of the Crusader, thank you. And you can see Varian and Thrall and Garrosh and Tyrion. They're all in the stands, and they periodically are making comments. And there's the one fight where you actually, if you're Alliance, you fight the Horde, and if you're Horde, you fight the Alliance. You'll see some exchanges between Varian and Garrosh. And Varian and Garrosh, and this probably has a lot to do with why, from a writing perspective, Garrosh made a good choice for War Chief. Maybe not a good choice as a member of the Horde, but from a writing perspective, what made it interesting to me is that Garrosh and Varian were like-minded, right? Like Varian, at least at this time.
Oh yeah, he was war hungry.
He was angry. He was angry as hell, and he wanted to kill any orc that he saw, kill him on sight. Very different than the Varian he became by the time of Legion. Right. And so Garrosh and Varian, just when they were in the room together, it's dangerous. It was. I think it was good for the story to, at least for a time, have them against each other.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the interesting. We can talk. Varian's another story, but Varian's story mirrors Thrall's, except for Varian didn't have a friendly orc to learn about. Right. He thought that orcs were just these vile people that cut. You know what I mean? And so it was Thrall was his friendly orc. Getting to know Thrall was this idea that okay, maybe they're not as bad. Starting with him, and then also the experiences of Jaina. Who was an advisor for him for a long time, and ended up being leader of the Kirin Tor, and his son Anduin, who was such a such a kind soul, such a soft and silky soul, right? You know what I mean? But that was the influence on Varian. It even talks a little bit about, if you watch some of the clips, even from Legion, about, the letter that he writes to his son and these different, like this idea that you changed, that Varian was changed more by Anduin. Like, I hope I taught you to be a real man, but your compassion and your love for others, your empathy, that changed me to make me the king that people will remember, not, you know, the vile. I remember when he came back, I was like, screw this guy. I prefer Onyxia. Like, I hated Varian. I hated him. And then as the story went along, his arc really came full, and I did a good job of bringing him back.
Yeah, particularly Mists of Pandaria, I think, is when I first really got to enjoy Varian as a character.
Right.
And
especially by the end, and he's like, no, because you're sitting there going, he's gonna kill everybody. He's gonna kill all the leaders of the Horde right now. I was sure of it.
Yeah.
And then he takes his sword and throws it down.
Yeah. Quester, if you haven't quested through the first few zones of Mists of Pandaria, there's a lot to see about the story of Anduin and Varian there. It's really great content, and it's in game. Some of it is blocked behind reputation, some of those quests, but it's there.
So throughout this whole thing, we got to Thrall stepping down, and we're going to wrap this up a little bit and end with Garrosh here. Thrall steps down, hands the mantle over to Garrosh, while he goes off and becomes hippie Thrall and puts his hood up, right? And gets his big hippie beads, puts his hood up, and starts just blasting the dragon soul at everybody. And Garrosh takes over. Garrosh makes some huge changes to the Horde. It's no longer Thrall's Horde. Garrosh is the war chief. And he wants that to be known. He has respect for Thrall, right? But this is Garrosh's Horde. And we talked a little bit about the Wrathgate. But what happens to the Wrathgate is that all the living races, Horde and Alliance, are deceived and betrayed by a group of Forsaken, led by, was it Putricide? No.
Yeah.
Was it Putricide?
And Varamathras. That basically killed everybody at the Wrathgate, threw a bunch of Scourge on everybody, right? That's where Sourfang's son died. That's where Bolvar Ford Dragon sort of died. Right? Well, I guess they both sort of died.
They both sort of died because you see them both later. But it was a huge defeat at the hand of the Lich King. Right? Putricide was human at that point. I'm confused. I don't remember who led the.
It's the guy. Yeah.
It was one of the mean guys.
I thought it was Putricide, but maybe it's not.
Anyway, all of this is happening, and look it up for us because we're going to be wrong. We're going to get tons of emails this week. We got Alice under the chat. We don't need emails, but we've got. So because of that, Thrall immediately doesn't trust Sylvanas, even though she swears her loyalty, swears she had nothing to do with it, swears to to destroy anyone that did have anything to do with it, right? But Thrall doesn't quite take her at her word. He doesn't declare war on all the Forsaken, but he does take over Undercity. At that point in the game, instead of these abominations that were walking around as the peacekeepers in Undercity, you've got the oh my gosh, the orcs. What were they called? The Kor'kron. The Kor'kron. Thank you. You've got Kor'kron guards walking around. Kor'kron elite walking around patrolling Undercity. It was under Orcish rule. Right? Garrosh was in charge, and he wanted to make sure it was in charge. Sylvanas wasn't in charge of Undercity. Sylvanas could still be the, leader, placeholder leader for the Forsaken, the talking head, but she had no power as far as Garrosh was concerned. Garrosh was in control of the Horde, and he does that. And all sorts of these little things that he starts making. And then he starts making these choices to protect the Horde, to defend the Horde against potential future attacks. For example, his biggest, what he believed, threat and Kalimdor was Theramore. A bunch of humans there that are peaceful-ish now, but have always been a problem, are still causing problem in that realm, right? That area, dealing with, or like just not, and they used to be the worst, right? With Admiral Proudmoore, and then, Jaina kind of sort of takes over, and it's a little bit more peaceful, but at the same time, there's also, you got Northwatch over there, These are humans that are invading Kalimdor, as far as he's concerned. So he destroys it. He makes the call and destroys it. Just innocent, guilty, good, bad, doesn't matter. He just, Alexander goes, they were killing Tauren. Yeah.
And I came to I figured
Only
out
Tauren.
I figured it out, but it looks like Alessandro beat me to it in the chat. Grand Apothecary Putris.
Not Putricide.
Not Putricide.
Thank you. That's where I got confused. They were killing Tauren. Maybe some of them. But either way, it didn't. For most people, were thinking that, and even people on the Horde. I remember doing this, and I'm like, I don't know, blowing up Theramore is the best idea. I mean, it's it's cool. I'm down, but there was definitely this sense of loss. Like, we just crossed, a line that we can't uncross. Right. And it was this idea, like, war at, signing up for war games, and playing capture the flag, and this idea of they kill all humans even on a PvP, whatever, but that's because they're in our territory. Or even if we're invading them, it's this idea of they're going to get us but taking it so big as to actually changing the face of the, map, wiping something off the map, literally. That was a big deal. And Garrosh did it. He was not afraid to do it. He went ahead and said, all right, this is the choice we're making. It's done. Theramore will no longer be a threat. I'm saving the lives of countless members of the Horde.
And
done.
Alessander's touching on a point here that I think is a major point of divide for Garrosh, is you either agree or disagree with what he did. And I know that there are people that, in retrospect, think that he did the right thing. So bear in mind what he did. He in an unprovoked attack, he completely annihilated an entire city, destroying all civilians, children, what have you. And he did it as a preemptive strike because he perceived it to be a threat. Now, was there skirmishes going on? Is there stories to tell to say that things were not peachy keen between these two? Yeah, I'm avoiding the debate on Nagasaki. There's a Hiroshima.
Exactly. I was like, it's not exactly the same, but in some ways it is. And I'm honestly still on the side of maybe we shouldn't have dropped the bomb. And maybe that was a bad idea.
I don't mean to speak for all non-Americans, but my perception is that the rest of the world generally sees that as a terrible atrocity that America committed. Right? Yeah.
And there are plenty of Americans that feel that way, and not as well. But it's one of those things. The consensus is, on one side, you're saying, well, we ended the war directly and immediately. That happened. War was over. No one else dies. Right? Yeah. Is the idea of, and that's I'm understanding that idea that's what Garrosh was going. We end the war now. We end the the human occupation of Kalimdor now, and we just annihilate it, and it's gone. And we have no more threats, no more lives lost, no more dead Taurens, as Alessander said, right? Mm-hmm. But there is that other side that's still like, was that necessary? Did we have to do that? Were we going to lose that many more people? Was there not a way to? And
this is fun, and like this is kind of a fun moment.
And that is I believe. Sorry, I'll let you continue, but I believe that is like that moment is a direct tie to World War II. Yeah, I think that's absolutely what they're talking. That's what it's supposed to be a connection to. It's this idea: should they, shouldn't they? And you've got people that were on Garrosh's side that was like, yeah, we had to do it, and people that were not on either faction going, no, that might not have been necessary. But anyway, keep going.
Oh, I'm just gonna say I'm gonna resist the comparison to World War II because I have very strong opinions.
Yeah, I do too.
World War II. Yeah, and it involves a lot of complexities that just aren't there in World of
Warcraft. But we see the parallel moving on.
We see the parallel, but we also, it makes it, when you talk about World War II, you're talking about real people in real lives and real families and real
Yeah,
civilians.
exactly.
In World of Warcraft,
You're talking
it's
about
a role playing
pixels.
game. We can play the part of somebody that is not exactly who we are, right? Like
Yes, we can be
the
evil,
real
truly evil if we want to be.
yeah, the real life me wouldn't preemptively throw a chaos bolt at a boar that I didn't want to deal with, but the me in World of Warcraft would.
Yeah,
Um, so this is where it gets sort of fun from a role playing perspective. Do you agree or don't you agree with Garrosh with what he did?
right.
And it gets layered because you can think, okay, I like what he did from a storytelling device because it was about damn time that someone rustled up a hornet's nest between these two because we want to see a fight. They're being too buddy buddy lately. So on that end, I like it. On the other hand, I categorically disagree with Garrosh's choice. I think it was a terrible thing to do, and I'm not sorry.
That's
That's
okay.
enough.
He's got to tell his dog.
Yeah.
His dog
Jane,
agrees with the garage, obviously.
come here, come here. I'll hold her. She'll be quiet.
It's okay.
So the now she ruined my train of thought. Anyways, I disagree. And from an RP perspective, I'm not a heavy RPer per se,
Right.
but I play on an RP server, and I really enjoy sort of like thinking about my characters. What do they think? Like, how do they perceive the world around them? And it makes it really fun because even as a horde character, you can disagree with it.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's important, and that's something. But that's what Garrosh brought. He brought a new, because we've had Thrall's the War Chief the entire history of the game until Cataclysm, right? And so Garrosh comes in and says no more. And it was the end of Cataclysm, really, that Garrosh sort of took over, or the middle of it. I think I don't really remember, but I know I remember it was the end when he dropped the mana bomb.
Yeah, so
that was going into Pandaria. But this idea that Garrosh comes in and he changes it. He changes things. Things are new. Things are different. We're a new horde doing a new thing, a new way, right? Mm-hmm. And that's all. That's what we needed as the horde, because I think we needed some dissonance in the horde as to who, are we Thrall or are we Garrosh?
Yeah.
Are we Kirk or Picard? I mean, it's not necessarily right, but at the same time, there's different. It's a,
and this is where, sorry, this is where it gets fun to debate as a horde player.
Oh, sure.
Where you can be like, hey, look, do you like Thrall? Like I've had this argument with people who say Garrosh did nothing wrong. I was like,
yeah, there were T-shirts at BlizzCon all over the Garrosh did nothing wrong. Like that's a popular thing. Like there's got to be guilds out there that's their motto.
And I think that's great, and I love that people think that because I mean that just makes this all so much more three-dimensional and fun to argue about. But like I do challenge that view. If you have that view, then you are not on Thrall's team. And I think that's a very important. You can't have it both ways. I mean, you can as a player, but as a character, you can't.
Right.
Like
exactly. If you're RPing fully RP, yeah. And it's interesting, but that's true. So Garrosh does all that, and he starts doing more and more and more stuff until he gets so hardcore that he actually kind of reverts back into this idea of the true horde, right? So we get to the end of Pandaria, where he decides to take all of the power on Pandaria, which we find out is the blood of Visage, right? The heart of Visage, right? The Titan that was pulled from the planet by Aman'Thul to cause this great injury that ended up being the Well of Eternity. We find the blood of Visage. Ugh, I can't even say it. Stupid Visage. Stupid old
just
god
call him
names.
Just call him the Sarge.
The Sarge. We find the blood of the Sarge, right? And Garrosh finds it, and he destroys the Veil of Eternal Blossoms in order to get to it, right? That's long story short. Mm-hmm. And when this happens, you've got this sect of the horde that is not with Garrosh. They don't think he's doing the right thing. He's destroying this new land. They don't want to be. They're even willing to commit mutiny, led by Vol'jin
and Thrall
and Thrall and Cairn and Chen. And you've got these, but it's still this idea of Vol'jin is kind of the first to speak out against the war chief, right?
And he's
and everyone else sort of follows suit behind him. But anyway, and that'll bring us up into our discussion next week. But to kind of wrap it up, Garrosh makes this decision that if you're not with me, you're not part of the Horde, right? I can't remember exactly what the confrontation was. I remember on the bridge, like Garrosh is fighting, I think, Shadowpan Man, right? Terran Su, right? But at some point they're brought up, but what about your Horde? Your Horde believe that you shouldn't do this. And he says, they are no longer part of my Horde.
Yeah.
Right? They're out. That's not the Horde anymore. I'm leading the Horde, and the Horde has always been, if you're with the war chief, you can be part of the Horde. And if you're not, you're out and you're an enemy.
And it's during this time, if you would have logged into WoW and walked into Orgrimmar during this time, you see like non-orcs being rounded up and held at gunpoint. Like they're just, do you remember that? It was so jarring to me to see like just trolls and Tauren or whatever, just like kind of hustled up, and you've got these orcs just like pointing guns at them. And,
right.
And, there's a General Nazgrim. His story is really cool that he's a Corcoran guard who
Nazgrim's great. It was that, well, it was almost this identity of sort of like what people paint General Lee out to be in the Civil War, like this idea of, I'm sorry, I'm a soldier for my state before I'm a soldier for my country. And if my state says that we're seceding and doing, he didn't really want to, but he did, and he led. So you've got this interesting story between doing your duty, whether it was right and wrong, whether you really agreed with it or not. And I'm not, there's, once again, going back, anytime we bring up history or politics or anything like that, I'm sure in many ways General Lee was a wonderful person. In many ways he was a terrible person, just like all of us, right? Yeah. But, not trying to defend him, but that's an interesting, like, being torn. Am I for the Horde, or who am I for? Everyone had to make a choice, especially orcs. Mm-hmm. Because they weren't getting openly thrown out of the Horde necessarily, but some of them were. You got to choose. Am I going to be, Kurgan or Picard, Thrall or Garrosh? What am I going to do? What choice am I going to make? It was really interesting. But that's all the time we have today. We've gone late again. Surprise. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. We just want to thank everybody for... we're going to talk some more next time about this, and we're going to have some really interesting questions about war chiefs that we're going to kind of bring into our last, we'll have more of a discussion next time rather than just talking about, hey, this is what war chiefs did and this is how things are. But we still got 2 more war chiefs that we have held so far that we're going to talk about.
And one of them will be brief.
One of them will be pretty brief. Yeah, their story, both of them might be a little brief because their stories have not lasted very long as of yet. I'm sure we will find plenty to say, but thanks again for joining us. You can find me, I'm Sharku. You can find me all of the places, Sharku_CTR at Twitch, Sharku_CTR on Twitter. Excuse me. Shoe Boots, you can find him at the Shoe Boots on Twitter. He has a Gmail account, the Shoe Boots at Gmail, if you want to contact him there. You can follow the show at Setback Podcast or email us all of the things that we got wrong or that you liked or loved or hated. Please tell us. Setbackpodcast at gmail.com. That is setbackpodcast at gmail.com. Check out our Twitter, like I said, at Setback Podcast. Also, you can see the show recording live on Monday nights at 9 Eastern, twitch.tv/Setback Podcast, or visit our Patreon. We want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon. We try to talk about them every week because they're incredible. We cannot do the show without them. They give us their money so that we can do this and pay for all the things that we have to pay for to be able to put the show out there and broadcast. And we just thank them so much. If you're interested in joining and being a patron for our show, there are some interesting goals coming up that we'd really like to get moving on. So if you're on the fence, do I want to, do I not? Please consider being a patron for our show. You can find us at patreon.com/setbackpodcast. And we really, honestly, we don't expect the money that you guys give us or the love that you guys give us, and you consistently continue to give it to us, and we want to thank you so much for that. But please consider supporting us on that. With that, I think we're going to go ahead and have to wrap up. Shoe Boots, you got anything going on this week?
I am eye deep in school for the rest of the month, so that's all I will be doing. I'm really scared I might even have to take a full-on hiatus from gaming if it gets any more busy. So, not much on my end. Sorry to say.
Yeah. I see you streaming every now and again, but it's usually for like 10 minutes.
I did pretty good for a while there.
Yeah.
I fully, so just, I mean, a little bit of self-promotion, I guess. I fully intend on launching my stream in a very real and consistent way. I've been sort of testing out different softwares and stuff lately. I will let you guys know on the show, but I would love to like get lore conversations going and exploring the alpha or beta client if I'm fortunate enough to get access to it. So
we'll play around with it. Yeah. And we're even thinking about Shoe Boots doing that on his own, but I'm even thinking about maybe doing something like officially with the Setback as well at some point to get lore conversations going when we're playing video games. But I like your idea. I'm stealing it, is what I'm saying.
Okay. I think it'd be great. Steal away. I'd love to have more of these conversations. It's fun to talk to people in the chat here, but we can only say so much because we're recording a show.
Right.
But yeah, my Twitch, by the way,
is that what we're doing?
Yeah. Twitch.tv/shoeboots. Add it to your list and hopefully I'll see you there.
All right, awesome. Well, until next time, everybody, where Jared hopefully will be back and we'll have the trifecta together again, and we'll be finishing our conversation on War Chiefs. Until then, catchphrase.
Catchphrase.
All right.
We're clear.
We're clear.